I now give the floor to Mr. Carlos Ruiz Massieu.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madam President, I appreciate the opportunity to brief the Security Council once again at the start of a new year that can be a decisive one for peace in Colombia. It is a pleasure to be joined by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Álvaro Leiva, to whom I reiterate my appreciation for the government's continued cooperation with the United Nations in Colombia. I also welcome today the participation in this meeting of Ms. Yolanda Perea Mosquera, a remarkable Afro-Colombian leader whose work on women and victims' rights and the response of conflict-related sexual violence is a powerful example of the resilience and commitment of Colombian civil society. Indeed, despite the many serious challenges the country still faces in extinguishing the embers of an armed conflict that has lasted more than 6 decades, it is an immense privilege and opportunity for the United Nations to be in this position to assist the Colombian government and people in their drive to consolidate peace. As we saw recently, during the observances of the 7th anniversary of the final peace agreement, there are obstacles to overcome, but also ingredients for success in the case of Colombia that would be an example for conflict settings elsewhere around the world. First, a political negotiated peace agreement that provides a detailed roadmap for addressing the causes as well as consequences of conflict, one that remains as relevant today as the day it was signed. Second, strong national political will, as we can see in the express commitments of the government, diverse institutions of state and civil society. And third, region and international community. A region and international community, including this Council, that has remained united in its support of the peace process, rightly inspired by the dogged commitment of Colombians to peace. Señora Presidenta.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, as described in the latest report of the Secretary-General, this last year showed evidence of the clear links between the implementation of the Accord and the initiatives taken by the government to hold dialogues with other armed protagonists in the country. Recent developments also show the need to move forward coherently in these processes, which, taken as a whole, have the potential to address persistent challenges and further entrench peace. After having laid strong foundations, it is necessary to see this stage now as an opportunity to speed up and to accomplish the commitments entered into. May 2024 be a year of implementation. For example, the Pact for the implementation of the ethnic chapter and the priorities set by the Office of the Vice President in this regard should serve as a guide to move forward with this transformative component of the agreement in 2024. It is also worth underscoring the notable increase in the acquisition formalization of lands as a result of the prioritization of the comprehensive rural reform in the government's agenda. I'm also sure that if it is used as expected, the National Agrarian Reform System, recently launched, will contribute to achieving more results for peasant populations, ethnic peoples, and rural women. Translating the eagerly awaited public policy for the dismantling of illegal armed groups and criminal organizations Translating this into tangible, emphatic action, whose results will be felt by the populations on the ground, will be another fundamental step in this necessary transition between making plans and implementing them. Without a doubt, building upon the progress made and prioritising those areas which have been left behind will be fundamental in meeting the expectations of millions of Colombian people and in bolstering the legitimacy and credibility of the agreement, which are preconditions for the successful achievement of other efforts currently underway towards peace. Madam President, distinguished Council members, without a doubt, security is the basis of the successful development of any peace initiative. However, there have been events in several regions of the country which give reason for concern. Unfortunately, since the cut-off date of the report, 4 ex-combatants of the former FARC-EP have been killed in Cauca, Chocó, Sucre and the Meta, respectively. Crimes against social leaders are also continuing, including indigenous peoples and those laying claim to land. I once again, in this Security Council, unreservedly condemn these unjustifiable attacks, which also erode the social fabric of whole communities. The situation in certain zones of departments such as Cauca, which is characterized by significant presence of indigenous and Afro-Colombian peoples, is particularly challenging, as a consequence of the presence and actions of various armed actors. It is precisely in areas such as these where there is a need for a comprehensive state presence to slow and contain the violence. There are, however, regions where, despite the difficulties, there is evidence that it is possible to reverse the violence. For example, according to figures of the National Police, homicides decreased by 16% between January and October 2023, compared with the same period in 2022, in municipalities which are implementing the development plans with territorial focus. These are municipalities which have historically been affected by the conflict. There were notable reductions, for example, in municipalities in the departments of Arauca and the Meta. But for these and other encouraging results to be sustainable and not just one-offs, it is fundamental for immediate progress to be made in the effective implementation of key public policies for prevention and protection. Such efforts, made alongside and in addition to the de-escalation which is being sought through dialogue with the various groups, provide prospects for relief for civilians.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, while facing challenges, the steady progress within Colombia's transitional justice system is a reason for optimism and hope in 2024. Its innovative and comprehensive structure, which combines both extrajudicial and judicial mechanisms, continues to further victims' rights. The Special Jurisdiction for Peace continues to investigate and prosecute grave crimes committed during the conflict by former members of FARC-EP, members of the public security forces, other state agents, and civilian third parties, while preparing for the issuance of its first restorative sentences. In December, for example, the SJP indicted 8 former members of the former FARC-EP Western Bloc within Case 01 for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed between 1993 and 2016. Given the crucial importance of restorative sentences to be delivered by the SJP for the success of the peace process, every effort is needed to ensure that enabling conditions necessary for their implementation are in place ahead of their issuance by the SJP. This means planning in detail the activities that will be assigned to be carried out by the sentenced individuals in service to victims and communities, assuring the funding, logistical support for these projects, and establishing the adequate security arrangements for this work to take place, particularly as much of it is expected to occur in rural communities. All of this will require coordinated efforts between the SJP, national and local authorities in the run-up to and implementation of the sentences. In addition, the Unit for the Search for Persons Deemed as Missing continues with the daunting task of providing solace to the families of some 100,000 Colombian men and women deemed as missing during the conflict. Last December, a resilient woman, Gloria, was reunited with her daughter, Irene, after more than 30 years separated when she was forced to flee their home in Putumayo due to threats. Irene was only 8 years old at the time. In addition to facilitating family reunifications, since its creation, the unit has recovered close to 1,200 remains of missing persons, helping families to finally find closure after years of suffering. Madam President, I remain encouraged by the continued commitment to peace of the vast majority of former FARC EP members. Their determination to move forward, despite the challenges, is to be applauded. I am confident that the government's multifaceted approach with instruments such as the recently established Comprehensive Reintegration Program provides an opportunity to meet former combatants' needs and expectations. To that end, setting in motion the national reintegration system with the necessary engagement of all relevant entities is of the essence. Another positive development which I would like to highlight is the government and former combatants' joint work within the National Reintegration Council to identify the special collective reintegration areas. With this new designation, the parties aim at fostering equal support to former combatants who opted for a collective reintegration process, whether they remain in one of the original locations where the former FARC-EP laid down their arms, known as TATRs, or move elsewhere in the years since. These efforts are promising and, most of all, demonstrate the great level of cooperation at this time between the parties to reach common goals. Señora Presidenta.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, I would also like to underscore the positive progress in conversations between the government and the ELN. I welcome the agreements reached during the last round of negotiations in Mexico in December and the progress in implementing previous agreements, including the bilateral ceasefire and the work of the National Participation Committee. I wish to encourage the parties to persevere in resolving their differences through dialogue, despite the challenges which are inherent to this type of process. I trust that the determination demonstrated thus far will bear further fruit during the next round of negotiations to be held in Cuba, including through the extension and strengthening of the ceasefire between the parties, inter alia through the explicit prohibition of ransom kidnapping, thus formalizing important commitments agreed upon in Mexico. Madam President, I also welcome progress made in the dialogue between the government and the self-styled EMC FARC-EP. The implementation of the current bilateral ceasefire has resulted in a necessary level of trust which will allow the process to continue. I encourage them to maintain their efforts with a view to consolidating them, including within the context of the third cycle of negotiations which has just begun this week in Bogotá. We will keep the Council duly informed of the progress of these dialogues. It's important to reiterate that the legitimate expectations of security and the enjoyment of rights by the communities in areas affected by conflict remain unmet in a number of regions. This is principally due to the high levels of violence generated by disputes between armed groups and the presence of criminal organizations due to a limited reach of state institutions. In this regard, I wish to echo the call by the Secretary-General to all armed actors to give tangible evidence of a genuine will to work towards peace, contributing to a de-escalation of violence throughout the country, bringing an end to confrontations between them, and respecting civilians. Distinguished members of the Council, this new year has seen the entry into office of hundreds of new regional and local authorities elected in the local elections last October. These include an Afro-Colombian ex-combatant who was elected as mayor in Cumaribo, Vichada. His unique knowledge of the dynamics and realities of the territory is an invaluable asset for any effort at building peace. To this end, it is fundamental to bolster the coordinated work of the state between national, departmental and municipal levels. Reprehensible actions which have happened over recent days, such as the attack against the life of the mayor of Tumaco, illustrate the risks faced by these local authorities. These highlight the need to guarantee their protection, which makes it essential that there is continued effective use of the comprehensive security system for the exercise of politics as provided for in the agreement. I also condemn the kidnapping of the registrar of the Department of Chocó. Madam President, I take this opportunity to wish every success to Mr. Oti Patiño and Ms. Vera Grabe in their important work as the new High Commissioner for Peace and the lead negotiator with the ELN. Vera Grabe is the first woman to occupy this post in the long history of peace work in Colombia. Without doubt, both of these jobs are key in order to successfully consolidate the efforts made thus far. Of particular importance is also the creation of an office within the Presidency devoted to implementing the 2016 agreement, which this was announced by President Petro last year. Madam President, distinguished members, I wish to conclude by underscoring the fact that for the progress made to become entrenched over time, it is necessary to better implement the agreement and to continue to make progress in the initiatives of dialogue with other armed actors. Continuing to work on both these jobs, bearing in mind that they are mutually reinforcing, can generate a virtuous cycle which will enable us to seize opportunities and mitigate risks. The encouragement and the active participation of this Council will continue to be an important stay in this work, and indeed one of the foundations, as I was saying at the beginning, of success. The Council's planned visit to Colombia will be another milestone in this long history of commitment to peace in Colombia. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Ruiz Massieu for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Madam Yolanda Perea.